Okay, working from photographs, I often do it. There are limitations to the camera and lens when it comes to exposure, proportions, distortion. I'll put up a link right now that further explains that in detail. However, sometimes if you take an exposure of a particular scene that you may want to paint later on, it also works if we crop in on it sometimes. Here is the original photo right here. And what I did was I cropped in down through here, over and up. And that's this photo over here. But what it did was it put a lot more emphasis on that dead azalea bush up here in the upper left-hand corner. And it also made a nice little flow from lower left to the upper right. You have a nice little movement here going back into the picture, which creates a really nice three-dimensional movement. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do this photograph right here on a 7.5 by 11 piece of Arches cold press 140-pound paper. We're going to keep the painting a little bit on the small side, make it more manageable, and this way we can make any corrections if we can, and we'll also take our colors down just a little bit at a time. In other words, we'll be adding paint and water to our painting in little increments to make it more manageable so we don't go too dark too quick. Let's get started. Okay, I'm going to put on my frisket, but first I will take my brush. I'm going to use a liner brush to give me nice squiggly lines, but I'm going to rub it in the Master's soap first. Brush cleaner and preservator. I use this and it keeps the frisket from gumming up on the brush itself. And then if I use it for a long time, what I'll do is I'll just take it, swish it out a little bit, and then put more new soap on it, and then go back to putting down my frisket. Let's go ahead and put on the frisket. Okay, I'm going to adjust my drawing just a little bit. I'm going to take this one out, and this one. The reason why is I want to give a little bit more room for just the distant shrubs and trees going off in. I want to start a little bit light up in here and then get darker and darker as I go over here. And then also I want to put in a top for this one. That'd be about right in here. And then this one could come down into that, but then I'll leave maybe a little bit of leaves and stuff in here, and then definitely in here. Let's go ahead and start painting. Okay, first I'm going to wet down all this upper area here, down to the tops of the rocks. And if I paint clear water around the rocks, that will stop the color and leave my rocks white paper. And again, since we're working small this time, it'll be a little bit more manageable as to how we do this. And if you're just starting in watercolors, that's a good idea to just paint small and make studies. And that'll help you with your color mixing, layouts, everything. And the reason why is sometimes if you don't have something drawn out right, it may not necessarily be your watercolor technique. It may be you might have had something wrong from the very beginning. And a watercolor technique won't save it. I'm going to wet this down pretty good just to give me some time. Mixing colors. Let things happen. One great thing about watercolors, you never know what's going to happen. And do the exact same painting a couple times and you'll get a completely different end result every time you do it. Okay, first we're going to take some real light, I'm going to use cobalt blue and a little bit of brown matter, and I'm going to make a real soft sky up in here. And then we're going to go with the greens. Mix a little bit of yellow. Probably use a reelin. I'll start with the light colors first. This is going to all happen while it's still wet. This is just the preliminary washes that will kind of have that airbrush effect. You can see how it's stopping at the water. I could pick up some of the runoff. I mixed a little bit of phthalo blue in this, so it's going to get deeper. And we'll put a little bit of burnt siennas and oranges in here too, just for that fall color look. I'm going to watch my puddling too on the Frisket itself. And this is some French ultramarine blue mixed in now too. We'll go a little bit darker here and there, especially back in here if we're working by our picture. Back to the orange. This is cadmium yellow deep actually. I'm going to mix a little bit of quinacridone gold. And we're going to just start some leaves here and there. And I'm just putting them in, and some of these areas we're going to paint around our negative spaces, so they will go darker after this dries good. We'll let that bleed out. There we go, a little bit on our own. Like this, leaves. And again, a lot of it will go darker. But you can see where I stopped the water. It's leaving our rock nice and white. I'll just vary the value here and there. Leave some of the white paper behind for highlights. And as it dries, I'll put some of the same colors in, but they'll start to get bolder and deeper, and they'll also bleed less and have a little bit more of a crisper edge, and that's what we'll start building up our layers just to give a three-dimensional effect. It's still pretty wet, but it'll give us time to work. And of course, if I have a lot of water on the brush with the paint, we'll also add to that. And if I want to take that out a little bit, clean out the brush, dry it off, and leave it suck it up. That's a little bit of French ultramarine blue with the yellows. Get a variation. Green. Kind of a muted green. This is phthalo blue, Windsor blue, mixed with the olive green. And that'll really make those white branches jump out at us later on. Right now I'm just dropping some in that will push back a little bit, and then the softer light colors should come out a little bit. Just to break up what's already there. And we'll have to keep going darker, but then we'll get to the point where we'll leave this dry, and then we will start working some straight edges. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to establish if this is a little bit more of a yellow bush, I'm going to paint dark greens around it, because I'm still trying to stay with my forms as to what's what and not just randomly throw colors down. We kind of have to keep tabs of what we're doing and why. And these darker colors here will make those rocks jump out too. Put a little bit there, and then later on I can even put like a sharper dead tree way in the background, very faint. Now it's starting to dry and I'm starting to get sharp edges, so we'll have to be careful what we want to end up with. And if I want to change things after it's dry, I could mist it down with my spray bottle, which is right here, and lightly mist it. Then that way I'll be wetting the paper without touching it, and then go back over with a little bit more colors. I just have to be careful not to lift up what's already there. And in some cases, we can even go back in with an opaque white, whether it be gesso or whatever, and give little hints of whiter branches way back in there, but they'll be somewhat subdued, being back in the shadows. And the amount of water and paint you have on your brush compared to how much water is on the paper will make all the difference in the world. And this is where working with little studies can really give you a good idea of how to work things. Okay, we're going to let that dry and we'll go from there. And remember, our orange tree is going to be white, so things are going to change quite a bit. Okay, I'm going to start putting some of the washes in on the boulders. I'll probably use cobalt violet and brown madder and maybe a little bit of French ultramarine, even a little bit of sepia if I want them real deep colors. And then I'm going to start putting some washes up in here real light as if they're background trees, and then we're going to start painting in the deep dark colors that will be between the sticks and back in, way back in. That'll push some things back in. And once we're done with some of those, then we could take our Misket off, Frisket, I'm sorry, Misket is for airbrush, and then the boulders will keep on putting more and more detail and darker colors as they come closer. Now I use these are just ceramic trays. A lot of them are for food that I get them from Amazon, and they work really well. I really like working off of ceramic because I found, for me personally, a lot of the plastic palettes that I've tried to use are kind of coated, and what they do is they beat up the water, and then you can't get that nice even mix from side to side or from color to color. You'll mix some colors in, and then all it'll do is beat up into droplets, and you don't have that nice gradated color to color that you could grab anywhere you want to get what value you want. You're picking up little dots of water, and that's it. So these, I'm just going to reactivate this with some water, and then I'll mix some cobalt violet over here, and that's what we're going to use to just start giving some washes to the rocks. Right now, this will be a number 6 Escoda Versatile. We'll try that for some of these rocks. It's a nice size for this size that I'm working on. And what I will start with is a real thin wash of the violet, cobalt violet, and a little bit of blue, and then maybe a little bit of burnt sienna just to warm it up if we want to. And what I could do now, there's right in here, there's a big patch of real dark. What I'll do first is wet that first and bring it down to the edge of this rock, and then wet all of this, so when I drop my colors in, they'll stop at the top of this rock, because we have to leave this one fairly white that we could do different patterns, because I don't want my patterns overlapping the rocks, otherwise it'll look confusing if the same pattern overlaps 2 different rocks. And we could just take this down just a little bit at a time. And I'm going to leave things a lot lighter out here. And this is the safe way to go. Just taking it down a little bit at a time. We're going to build up this side right here. And we could still even make some of these. And then again, keep in mind, I'm just starting to rough in my shapes as to this is the side of the rock. This will be the top up here. So it'll be lighter. But then I'll add more and more dark colors as I go. And just define my shapes further and further. And again, We don't have to rush on anything in a way that, just say for example, I could drop colors in now while it's wet, but if I leave that dry, that's not too late to do that. I could just mist it down with clean water and drop more colors in, and they'll bubble out and blend out just like if they would do right now. And I want to put some of this brown matter in mixed with it. There's kind of a lichen on it, and I kind of liken that. And remember, these will lighten up quite a bit as they dry. And if I want, I could take a semi-dry brush and just run across it real lightly and let the tooth of the paper grab the paint, and I'll get a real subtle texture. And then we'll redefine some of these here. I can mix some water in with this so I don't go too dark too quick, because remember, these are the distant boulders and I don't want them to get too dark right away. And then later on, because this is still staying fairly light, I could take some real dark branches and put them up over everything to push those back and to put things in the foreground. Now this one's kind of dark here, but I'll still start out light because I'd like to slowly build up my textures with layers. And it gives you the chance to see how things progress if you want to change things as you go. Because sometimes if you get happy accidents somewhere, if you get a real nice interesting blend of colors or something like that, you may not want to paint over that and leave the watercolor happen the way it is. And then this one is fairly dark down here, this side. And then I'm going to go ahead and wet the next boulder first. I'll just give it a little bit of texture on top. Then later on I'll even be able to go back around them with real deep dark lines for just cracks that'll add some complexity. Okay, now what I want to do is wet this first, just with clean water, and I'm going to stop the water right at the edge of the next boulder. And that way all my mixing will stop. I gotta look at it sideways to see when all is wet, because it even has kind of like a pattern that's running down. You can even turn the painting sideways a little bit, but it's pretty well in place where it's at, so I'll just leave it there for now. Okay, then now I'm going to take those same colors. The brown matter works really good for this. Kind of like a grayish purple. And then this will just be the start. And then the color will stop where the water ends. And then I'll take some darker colors over here, and then once I start putting in my cracks, crevices, I can take a little bit of water to that. I didn't put any water up there. And let's see, I'll take a little wee bit more up in here. And if I do want some straight edges, well, it's dry. And I'll make these boulders darker and darker as they get closer to the viewer. Put a little bit of blue in there. That's French ultramarine. It'll have a snap compared to cobalt. I'll put a strong straight edge there where the edge of that boulder is. And we're going to make one dark line right through here. But we'll leave it bleed out a little bit. Okay. We'll leave that one go. Now we could do the same thing with this one down here. It starts up in here and comes down on an arc and then up in here, and then I'll make this one lighter because there's a lot more texture in the foreground boulder. We're going to wet this one down first. I don't want to run my water into this one or that'll bleed down and I'll lose my hard edge if I wanted a hard edge there. That's about really the only thing you got to remember about watercolors is you either want a hard edge or a soft edge. That's it. Okay, we'll go with the same colors. We're going to start up in here. And then later on I can even take some real light washes of blues and grays over everything. That won't affect this much at all if I leave this dry good. And that's one thing you really have to do is to make sure if you're going to use multiple layers, make sure each layer dries really good, only because you'll just keep on mixing the colors together and you might end up with a gaudy gray mess. And then if I want that straight edge there a little stronger, I could take a paper towel or Kleenex, just daub the edge of it, and as soon as I lift up that water, that's where the color will stop. There will be a real dark black line right in here later on. And I try to stay with the formations of the rocks because the reason why is that rock is a specific kind in a specific area, and it does have certain features that you may want to keep with it rather than making up just any kind of random rock. You can if you want to, but if it looks like a specific rock, that's even better. And I'm going to do this again right in here, wet this, and we'll put a little bit of that in there. Again, it'll stop with the water. And after this dries, I can take a real light dry brush and make a real subtle texture. But the brown matter in French ultramarine blue is working real well for this. And if I want to take that and blend it off, just take some clean water and just brush it up in. And that's it. And then keep in mind, we could also go back in and lift some of that out. But this is fairly dark. I'll lift some out in here. It has to be just right. If it's too wet, it'll just flow back. If it's too dry, it won't be able to lift. We'll leave that like that. This is already too dry. We'll just let that like that. This one's going to be pretty dark. And then we'll put some texture in here. A little bit in this one. We'll dry brush this one. Just to show you the difference. I'll put a little wee bit more brown matter. And then just to take it down to a subtle gradation. And these we can make darker. And then there's a nice pattern there started. And we'll keep some of these areas a little bit darker in the foreground again. But if I want to start off with a dry brush and then add clean water to it, I could get quite a few different effects. Just leave some of the edges blend in and leave some of the edges sharp, and that'll be a nice mix of a little bit of everything. This will give us just some layers of stones. We can go darker. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'll wet it down first. Okay, let's drop some in there. Okay, we're going to make this a little bit darker. Right in there. Okay, we'll let that dry. I'm going to leave that dry just a little bit. And then I'm going to drop some water into it just to get some spots. This is okay, this is okay. We'll redefine all of these. This has to go a good bit darker. That's only one layer. I have to put some distant trees in here. We could do that now. I'm just going to make a real light gray. Pretty much almost the same colors I'm using here now. And we'll put some distant trees and end them at the green. One more big one. Blend that out a little bit at the bottom. It'll look a little bit more misty then. Okay, we'll let that dry. And I'm going to take darker greens in here, here and there, just to define some patches a little bit further. Than this is going to go really dark. This is going to go really dark down in here. And then I have to define some leaves, and I'll be painting all the negative areas. We're getting there. We'll leave this dry good so far. Okay, now here's where I'm going to get a little bit fancy. Now we could see that right in here on our photograph, there are some real strong yellow leaves up against a really dark background. So what I'm going to do is go back to my Frisket, and now that I already have the yellows down, what will be interesting is that if I put Frisket back over some of these, some of the leaves may be a little bit greenish and yellow instead of just all yellow. What I'm doing is I'm taking sections of colors there, and then I'm going to preserve them just the way they are. And then later on, I could even take real strong red. It would be an opaque red, but then go back over certain places here and there. Now what we have to watch is, when are we going to remove our Frisket? That is after we're done with any patterns, linear patterns, circular, leaf patterns, branches, anything you could think of, after we're done with those. So then that way we don't have to worry about trying to continue that exact pattern on the other side of the branches. Let's go ahead and put in our Frisket here and there on what burnt sienna and the Aquarelle and some of the oranges. Actually it's the yellow deep, cadmium yellow deep. I'm going to put some here and there, and then what we'll do is we'll just paint over that and then lift that up later, and we'll have light colored leaves over a dark background. Let's go ahead and put in our Frisket. Okay, while our Frisket is drying, I'm going to go ahead and put some darker colors up in here just to start, just to see how it's going to look. And I'm going to drop down a smaller brush. This will prevent me from overworking real large areas, because this is getting smaller back in here and it's further away, so I don't want to make any real big shapes. I want to keep my shapes tight. Okay, this is burnt umber and French ultramarine blue. And this light green right in here, I'm going to paint around it so it pushes that green forward. And this real fine texture will add complexity to the distance. I'm going to make those distant trees just a little wee bit darker. Be a little bit easier with a smaller brush. This is with a little bit of permanent magenta. It will really snap it up, and I'm going to tone that down. Again, I'm just painting around the negative areas. Put a real light wash of blue over the boulders. If I want to work a real light, I'll rinse off my brush and then wring it out with my fingers, just so I don't flood that area with water. And again, this will add a little bit of complexity. I'll go back and destroy some of the hard edges if I need to. Anything that catches my eye too much, then that may be an edge that needs softened up a little bit. And remember, we got Frisket laying around here, so when I go to rub it off, there's going to be some bright yellow spots and burnt sienna spots here and there. Put in a little bit of cobalt blue now. Gray it down a little bit. Some of these are really dark. I'm going to rearrange this boulder a little bit too. It's going to go even darker than this. In some cases, I do want to kill some of that daylight coming through the white of the paper, so to speak. It'll keep mixing for a while too after I let it go. Now this is just straight cobalt violet, but because I'm putting it over other colors, it may not look straight because of the glazing layer effect. Just add a little bit here and there. And that contrast will diminish as it goes back. This contrast is going to be a lot stronger up here. And we have this kind of stippling to do down and through here, up in here. We got a little ways to go yet, but it's shaping up. Okay, I'm going to keep on making these areas in here darker, and then a slight linear pattern with all the little shrub branches way back in there. And then also I might tone these couple rocks down just to subdue the contrast a little bit and leave these the brighter, more contrasty ones up here. Right now I think what I'm going to do, just to start off, is I'm going to mist everything down in a foreground and then just hit it with real light, maybe a cobalt blue and a little bit of just a splash, some texture here and there. And blue's so light I don't think it'll hurt if it goes anywhere else, but these parts of the rocks are going to stay fairly light. And then if I mist them down, it'll break up some of the edges and not leave it just a perfect dot. Okay, I'll go back with a Kleenex and just mop up some of these here and there. Kind of a watercolor eraser. Those real dark dots are real eye-catching, so dab them a little bit, lift it up a little bit. Once these dry, I can even give it a couple more coats here and there. There's a little bit of cobalt violet. And obviously I watched where I put some of my patterns, but these, since stone is somewhat random, that's what will help my randomness. So I'm not putting down little dots here and there exactly. Just splash them. Wherever they go, that's where they go. There's a little bit of brown matter. We would mix in with the cobalt blue and the cobalt violet. I'm not going to put too much texture out on these, only because they're a little bit too far away to see that much of a small shape. Atmospheric perspective. Back to my eraser. Okay, let's let that dry. You give this one real light coats of a gray and then darker down in here. And we'll pull out some shapes a little bit darker. And I'm going to make these two separate rocks here. Then we'll put some dark on our leaves, linear patterns back in here, maybe make some of the foliage a little bit darker, and then we'll be ready to take off our frisket. But then keep in mind, on this particular dead tree, then I'll go back to the white and start putting little patches of dark here and there, especially to determine which branch is in which front of each. That way it places them in a three-dimensional form instead of just having them all on one plane. Some will be pushed back, some will come out forward, and then also I'll have some darker branches, maybe even coming from the tops of these and going up through and here and there, just because there are completely dark branches that may have not lost their bark yet. And that's usually why these are silvery, that they're just dead wood with no bark on it. Let's go ahead and let that dry. Okay, it's still a little bit damp down here, but I think we can start working up here. And what I'm going to do is put a linear texture this way for all the leaves that will go back in underneath the shrubs, and then a vertical texture to kind of denote all the different branches and twigs that are coming off all the bushes that are in the background. And I don't know, unfortunately, where my frisket is on the yellow because I made it orange. Easy to see, but up against orange and yellow is kind of defeating the purpose. But it'll skip over here and there, and then we'll still be left with nice orange leaves. Now, since this is a lighter colored rock back here, I'll take a little bit of orange, put over it, a little bit of foreground bush. And then even like back in here, a little wee bit, we'll try it, put a little wee bit of orange right in here, just if it was growing up between the rocks. Keep that flat edge there. This is a lot of brown matter with a little bit of French ultramarine. The leaves could obviously be going up the sides of the rocks. Okay, I threw some sepia in it now, so it'll darken it down, some of the shadowed areas. We're going to take our horizontal pattern up into here and then start to go upwards just to show the slope of the hill. Subtle details sometimes, even if it's a loose wash, can make all the difference in the world. This way I could continue my pattern right over my protected shrub. And sepia with French ultramarine is just about black. And again, with small brushes and just doing a little bit at a time kind of helps, not giving you the chance to mess anything up seriously, that since it's such a small area, you may be able to correct it. Okay, we're going to start our linear patterns. I'm trying to paint around what I think will be sticks, twigs in the background. They'll be lighter in value, but since they're back in the shadows, it'll be less noticeable. And I'm trying to randomize the value a little bit too. And remember, this is going to be broken up a lot once I take the misket off, so what we see now is going to change quite a bit once we end up with that real bright shape up against the dark background. What we're doing in here is going to be all pushed back. A little bit of green. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. Okay, I'm going to stagger the edge of that rock there. Just a little bit of yellow here and there. Then we'll paint around it when it comes time to painting in the rock itself. Okay, those are fairly dark. I'm going to make some dark ones. I'm going to go back to my number 6 Escoda. I put a little bit of green in this. I'll go darker after this wash. And this is Windsor green, maybe a little bit of Windsor blue, and then also brown matter. Okay, and to build up layers, I'll have to leave this dry a little bit or it'll just keep on puddling out. And we'll put a little bit of this green, toned down, kind of like a greenish gray, in some of these other rocks. I wiped some of the paint off on a blot paper, and more importantly, some of the water. This is a real dry brush. And scrub pretty hard and work it just to get any color. One thing about watercolor, you got to make some really subtle value changes. Okay, I'm going to leave some of that dry. We're getting close to being able to take off our frisket though, even on the leaves, and see what's left. Okay, I want to make one little adjustment up in here. I made the underbrush a little bit too dark too quick. I wanted it to kind of blend off into nothing a little bit more. So what I want to do is, just to see if we could try and fix it, I will get my eraser out, and I'm just going to mist that area down a little bit, just like that, and leave it sit for just a little while, and then I'm just going to dab it and try and lift some off, just to lighten it up a little bit. And then if it gets too light, I can always obviously go back over it. But this way it won't be so dark so quick. I wanted to leave my darker colors and more contrast closer to the foreground. That's taking it out. I can always go back into it a little bit. But that's just the way we could do it. Now what will happen though is, because I wet it and left it bleed out the water, then if I had any straight edges in there, I may lose them. So in other words, to a certain extent, I may have to go back over some of those things and redo them. But once that dries, it'll lighten up a little bit more. You can see how much I took off on my eraser. And that'll lighten it up, and that'll be just a little bit more of a gradual gradation. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to have to wait till that dries or I'll ruin the surface of the paper. But I'm going to go ahead and take the frisket off, and in the meantime I'll go work down in here, darken up some of these stones, put some more detail in the foreground boulders, and we'll be on our way. Okay, I mixed up some real thin cobalt blue, cobalt violet, and a little wee bit of brown matter, but this is so light that my rinse water that I use to clean my brushes with is probably darker than this, but I'll still build it up just a little bit at a time, just to give the rocks some form. Like take this line right here and then continue it on, just to give the boulder some shapes within the borders of each boulder. And once this dries, I'll go back in with my real deep line work and pull out some more details, a little bit more, follow some of these patterns, make some of these darker. And all that is where the layers of rock are fracturing off and leaving dark lines. Sometimes if you do know what's going on in your painting, it can help render what you're trying to do. I'm going to put a little bit of these same greens, a little bit of brown matter just to gray it down, but that's almost kind of like a mossy effect, especially if it's in the shadows or near the ground. I'm really trying to control how much water I have on the brush here, because if I have too much, then the paint and color will just puddle out and I won't get the texture I'm looking for. When I grab the water and the color off the palette, I kind of hit it a couple times, just barely get any water. I could also use my daub paper, but then that's if I really need it dry. Okay, we'll let that dry, and once this dries, it's getting there already. I'm going to go ahead and take that Frisket off. We'll see what we got, then that way once I see what my light colored shrub is going to look like, it'll help me determine to take some of the stones darker. I also have to make the lines too, but right now they're kind of jumping out at you because they're the only white object in the painting, lighter colored, lighter valued. But once I take this out, hopefully they'll balance out then a little bit better. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take the Frisket off. I still could go back in. I'll just have to paint around the tree though. But I want to see what's going on. And then I'll also take the Frisket off the orange and the burnt sienna down here for the leaves. Up in here, there's some. But I'm just going to use a rubber cement pickup. And that's why I had to leave the paper dry good, because if you try and do this with the paper wet, it will definitely dig it up. But what I want to do is just take it off, and then we will see what we got, and then I'll start putting the branches in three-dimensional space, painting some back a little bit and painting some up, and just how they crisscross each other. We'll go ahead and take it off. Just lightly rub it. You can see what a difference it's making already. Bright white. And then these are the branches that I want to paint a little bit further to just define where they're at in relationship with the other branches that are around them. Okay, we'll take all that off. Now you can see the lighter colored shapes. I put a good bit down on the ground. Then I could go back in and fine tune. And what I could do is even add some different values to like each individual leaf. So in other words, it's not just perfectly yellow the whole way across. I can put a little wee bit of red on some edges or whatever. Depends on how crazy I want to go, but we can always experiment. I think that's it. A little bit more down here. That might be it. And now that's our tree. Now we can see what it looks like, and then even on the bottom here, I can make it dark some places where the bark might still be there, and define how maybe this branch comes down into the front side of the tree, just like this one, but then some of these other ones are the back side of the tree, so the main trunk itself will go over that branch. And just to put a little wee bit of complexity to our shrub and just give them a three-dimensional effect. And make all these darker with my fine lines, but you can see the wash. Hopefully the camera will pick it up, but it's so subtle that I'll add a couple more here and there just to add textures to the boulders. But these guys are fairly white, fairly flat, so I'll kind of leave them the way they are in the photo and then maybe pull a little bit out. But we'll go ahead in and define a little bit of our tree first just to see how he's going to look, and then put some black lines in too off of those. And that's just the smaller branches that still have their bark on them. These branches right here, this branch right here is coming out at us, so we want to make sure all of these are in front of all of these, and it'll just make it look right. In other words, something won't be puzzling to the viewer, and if something confuses the viewer, that may be a sticking point to stop the flow of the painting, and that is obviously any painting of any subject. So what we want to do is make sure that if this one is coming out of the front and it's going up this way, then we want to make sure this one crosses over this bigger branch to bring it out in front. So we're going to start doing that now, and we'll use a little bit of burnt sienna, maybe some of that same greens, and we'll put some bark down in here. Now if I made this trunk down here a little bit too narrow, I could make some darker colors over here and just kind of like exaggerate the width of it a little bit, just to clean it up a little bit. But that all happened when I put the frisket down, and however you put it down, that's the shape you're going to have. So you have to be careful if you are going to use frisket in that respect. Let's go ahead and fill this guy in. Okay, right now all I'm doing is just blocking in what branch is in front of what, just to make sure I know what's going on myself. This way, when I further darken the branches, I'll know which ones to take darker, which ones to keep lighter, and then also even where the branches join each other, one branch coming out of another, that's where I could really emphasize what branch is in front of what. Very important compositionally. Now the boulders back in here are kind of bothering me too. What I want to do is take these, at least these up in here, and push them back a little bit further, just like this one up in here. I just added some of those grayish greens to this one, and I pushed it back a little bit. I can even give it a little bit more, just so there's a hint of boulders. But what it'll do then is it'll push them back further, because I don't want these to appear on the same plane as these down here. I want them to look like they're going back into the picture, so I'll diffuse them down a little bit, and that'll push them back in. I could also break up the shapes a little bit more too. That way there won't be any hard edges jumping out at you too. These, just like this, these are going to come forward, and just like we thought that all the background shapes and values are pushed back now with this white jumping out in front of us. Then the bottom, I will definitely put in more cracks and crevices. Now here's what I wanted to show you though. This is what's called Dura, and what it is clear acetate that later on, if I decide to put in, this is just burnt umber and French ultramarine blue, if I decide to put in a tree or something somewhere in here, I could put it in and see what it looks like without making that correction or change before I actually do it. And this way, just like my photograph reference up in the upper right hand corner, there's a tree coming up along the edge. Now, just because it's in a photo, I don't have to put it in, or I could use my acetate to kind of figure out where I want it. That will it go all the way off the picture down here, as it's not going to be growing out of a rock. It could grow between the rocks. But point being is, it gives me the opportunity to experiment without making any permanent changes. This way, then that way, if I do like the tree, the way it's roughly painted up, then I could also move it around to see where I would want it. If it comes off the painting way down here and goes up, that's going to push everything back, because now the tree is going to be the first and foremost object. And it being dark, then I can also keep in mind, if I want to put some dead leaves on it and just some brown here and there, and make them hang down all dried out and wilted, it'll give me a rough idea to see where it's going to be and what it'll look like. But also, it may get too confusing, or too much of it may be lost up against the dark colors I already have there. So that may not be a good idea to put in a tree such as that now. But the Dura will definitely give you an opportunity to change things and do things without making a permanent adjustment to your painting. There's good and bad to it also. What I can do is just literally wipe it off with a wet paper towel, and it's gone, and I can reuse it over and over and over. But I can only pretty much put down one layer of paint, whatever that color may be, because if I try to go over it again, it's not going to be able to build up layers. It'll just erase that layer, remove that layer, and that will be it. But I'll put up the picture of the book now to show you what it looks like. And sometimes it's really nice to use in case you don't want to make a permanent adjustment, or if you're not sure about it. Let's go ahead and make some of these changes. The Dura gives me the opportunity to see what my changes will look like before they're actually made. I even scrub out some of the edges of the boulders, changing their shapes completely. This helped in staggering the sizes and shapes more than what they originally were. By also adding all of the darker edges to the right-hand sides of the boulders, not only pushes them back, but also eliminates the need for that tree on the right-hand side. Now, this is all compositional and has nothing to do with watercolor techniques. Although I'm using watercolor techniques to make the corrections and changes, it has very little to do with what the painting may look like in the end. That all may be composition or drawing. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I went back in and just gave some white patches here and there, but because it was thinned out with water, the color is still bleeding through a little bit, so it's not a pure white. I see kind of a light gray here and there, which is working good. That is pretty much it. I went ahead and put some reds and oranges just to give you a rough idea that if you want to put some color back in, just subtle touches here and there. I do use gouaches for just any kind of small highlights of any kind of color. Okay, we got to this point. Now, this is why it's very important to watch the entire video sometimes from start to finish, because when I originally wanted to keep these rocks back in here lighter to push them back a little bit compared to the darker ones would be here, because these foreground boulders are lighter in general by value, just the way the rocks are, I had to reverse that entire process. By making these darker back here, it puts them closer to the value of the distant trees and shrubs. That way it pushes them back and they're more lost now that the lighter colors of these foreground boulders are jumping out at you. Unfortunately, that same process is still working with our shrub. Our shrub is now pretty well done. We could keep it with the texture it has, but I really can't make it too much lighter, so what I'm going to try to do is make the background darker. Now, this is where I mentioned that I'll have to paint around all the branches. That could be time consuming, and I also have to really try to maintain some patterns back there and not just make it dark and that's it. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine, but then sometimes you create dead spots that if you have too much dark color or just black color, it creates kind of a hole in your painting, and then that's compositional, not necessarily a watercolor technique. So what I'm going to do is go back in with my burnt siennas, brown matters, maybe a little bit of the phthalo green, the burnt umber, and the French ultramarine, and make all this area from about right in here over darker, especially down in here. And then that way it'll indirectly lighten up our tree, and hopefully it will jump back out at us, and then it'll also indirectly lighten up this background, which will make it look more back in the distant compared to the darker colors up here. Let's go ahead and try and do that, and we'll wrap this one up. By painting behind the azalea bush, really makes a difference and pushes it out to the foreground and gives it more contrast. However, trying to paint around it is a major challenge. Trying to keep a random effect behind the shrub really makes you appreciate the time spent on the frisket. A must to have with watercolor. Where you have lost and founds, or what could be considered transitional areas where we go from the leaves to the boulders, that's nice to have similar values. Then that way that has a nice path to go from one object to another. Where if you have the lost and founds, where a found is maybe even this little hard edge here, this rock comes out a little bit forward, or these hard edges down here, these rocks really come forward against the darker leaves and background boulders. Again, be careful when it comes to drawing, composition, everything that has to do with it. Something may be bothering you, but it might not be your watercolor technique. Watercolor technique is different from just troubles with your drawing or composition to start with, that it may not look right or something may be bothering you, but that may not necessarily be what you're doing with your watercolors. So I'm going to wrap this up. That's just to give you a rough idea of not to panic, that you may be able to salvage a painting or change it, but more importantly, this has got to be the most important, that if you follow through with a painting, no matter how good or bad you think it looks, give it a chance and you'll definitely be learning something from what you're doing for the next time. What I want to do is take some greens over this orange and kill that painted around effect and create a shape inside there. That's where the frisket really makes a difference, by not having to interrupt your strokes of colors over. And we will darken this up a little bit up here. Okay, now that that adjustment has been made, I'm a little bit happier with everything, since I don't want that painted around effect of the branches, trying to create shapes that are kind of continuous behind the branches. There we go. We'll let that dry, and as things dry, they do change. That is why you always have to go back and check, see what your progress is, and sometimes there's happy surprises, and sometimes there's obvious corrections that may need taken care of. Okay, I left this little area dry good, and it evened things up a little bit. Again, that's why it's really nice to let things dry sometimes and go back with a fresh eye to see what's going on, because things will change depending on the color, depending on how much water. When I first darkened this up too much, I had way too much color compared to water, and it didn't lighten up that much. So my point would be is, depending on how much color versus water you have on the brush, will also determine how much it will lighten up as it dries out. With all those adjustments made, we'll go ahead and stay with this. That will be it for this one. Hopefully you picked up a lot of little interesting, helpful hints of what to do, how to do it, and more importantly, maybe how to change things or adjust things as you go, because things will change with watercolors as they dry. Thank you very much for watching. Until I see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.